So, Stygian Onslaught has finally arrived, and in this video, I am going to show you everything you need to know how to deal with this newest endgame mode, and how to best optimize all the rewards it offers. Before we begin, my intention with this video is to cover difficulties 4 and 5 for Stygian Onslaught. Difficulties 1 and 3 are pretty simple if you have decent enough account, but even then, all the tips I give here apply to every difficulty. However, there is also a secret dire difficulty 6 challenge that only unlocks after beating difficulty 5 fearless. But the truth is, this mode is more or less designed for mega whales only, or at least those who have heavily invested into specific characters. I am talking about extra constellations and signature weapons. The reward for clearing dire difficulty are 4-star weapon skins, but if you also cleared within 180 seconds total, it then rewards glowing variant 5-star weapon skins. But again, even me who has every character, but not high vertical investment in them, this is impossible for me to do. I am quite conflicted about this because, on one hand, the weapon skins are temporary and only last for the duration of the patch, but there's definitely some problems with this even then, and I'll most likely make a video soon talking about these issues. Still, since you can co-op together from difficulty 1 to 4 and gain rewards from them, I believe even with random people through matchmaking, you can get this done. But I'll talk about co-op a lot more later in the video. And for now, let's talk about the general strategy. Now, the first and most important thing to acknowledge here would be that unlike Spiral Abyss, everybody in the team will start the fight with 0 energy. This means the first rotation against any boss will require you to quickly build up energy for everyone so their burst is ready. And you've guessed it, Favonia's weapons will be extremely powerful here since they will help a ton with this. However, if you're running, let's say, non-energy reliant units like Mawika or Skirk, then I do recommend to still unleash at least their bursts and or standard combos after other 3 teammates have used their skills to generate energy on the first rotation. But other than that, yeah, Favonius and even sacrificial weapons will be super important here to quickly build up your team's energy. Now, let's talk about the 3 bosses and go over their strategy and best teams. Keep in mind, to clear difficulties 4, 5, and 6, you will need to use 3 different teams of units. But if that's not enough, you can't even share the same weapons or artifacts between different teams, as I've tested this myself. The game will detect this, which means it will reset the battle record if you do that. And this will become a bit of an account check for anyone who doesn't have specific units to beat these bosses on highest difficulties. But I'll also talk about ways to overcome this if you play in co-op instead. Anyway, starting with Hydro Tulpa, the main thing about it is that you do not want it to absorb these little half Tulpas it summons at the start of battle and then roughly every 30 seconds, because if they get close to the boss, it will become enraged, heal itself, and will be much harder to beat. Best way to deal with these little suckers is by using a cryo teammate, since one single cryo application destroys them. However, Dendro application is also pretty fast at clearing it, so someone like Nahida can be great here. Still, best teammate to deal with this boss, especially if using Mawika, will be Sitlali, as you can see here. Otherwise, use some other cryo unit. Another mechanic to look out for would be after 45 seconds when battle started. The Hydro Tulpa shields itself, and you need to deal damage quickly to break the shield. Otherwise, when the time runs out, current on-field unit will be instantly defeated. And as far as I'm aware, this is a straight up HP shield. Seems about to be 9 to 10% thickness of its total HP, and I've tested all elements against it. It does feel like you just need to do raw damage to quickly break it, but I'll update my pinned comment if anything changes. Now, I'd say the fastest way to clear this boss would be by using a Pyro DPS because, naturally, Hydro Tulpa always has Hydro Aura active on it, which means any Pyro attacks that can cause reactions will result in vape damage. Obviously, Mawika will be extremely strong here, hence I expect her to be used by most speedrunners, but another good contender here could be Arlecchino or Hu Tao. Also, keep in mind Natlin units who buff with Cinder City artifact set will end up not utilizing this set since, by default, all reactions will be Hydro related, so Hydro and the element of the wielder will be the only buffed elements. This means if you use someone like Yansan with Mawika, the Pyro Archon will sadly not receive any Cinder City buff, and in this case, it's better to run Yansan with something like Noblesse set to give 20% attack boost for the team instead. The only exception if trying to buff Mawika would be Pyro Traveler using Cinder City, who could also help her with building up her Night Soul burst. Now, you might be wondering, why no mention of MVP Pyro 4 stars like Benny and Xiangling? Well, the problem with this boss is that you do not want it to use too many Pyro units, preferably only Pyro main DPS because Benny and Xiangling will be needed for the next boss. So, if you don't have a good main Pyro DPS to build a team like this with Mawika or a team like these with Arlecchino and then Hu Tao, well, let's talk about the next best thing. Hyper Bloom. Since you can generate blooms very quickly with Dendro from the boss's innate Hydro Aura, a team like this with Alhaitham could work. But if you're struggling to survive here, just make sure to use a cryo shielder like Diona, Layla, or Sitlali to take care of those pesky half Tulpas. But yeah, overall, Hyper Bloom is definitely going to be weaker than using a main Pyro DPS, but it is an alternative, and you should be able to clear at least difficulty 4 and 5 with a well-invested team. Now, moving over to the next big fella, Lava Dragon Statue, and I'm gonna say this now. You cannot ignore this guy's mechanics because it will have a massive resistance to damage until you beat it up fast enough with pyro damage. You can see here, once I build up his circle bar twice, not only will he start taking a lot more damage, but also he will lose a massive amount of HP from the special white damage he takes when his circle bars are filled. And sadly, that's why I said you will need pyro units here. I have had the best success here with Benny and Xiangling while running either Varessa or Knight Burning team. If playing Varessa with Xiangling, Benny, and Chevres, the first rotation is quite smooth, especially if you give both Xiangling and Chevres Favonius lances, since then, quick swapping after hold skill from Chevy to Xiangling will allow her to regain massive amount of energy, and quickly unleashing that Pyronado will help build up Lava Dragon's circle bar. Still, whether you go with Knight or Varessa, it's important to drop Benny's burst whenever it's ready on first rotation, to then continue spamming his skill that will have a super short cooldown, which will quickly build up the boss's circle bar, and of course, provide tons of energy for Xiangling. And then yeah, on second rotation onwards, just do the usual buffs set up so that Varessa, Knight, or other DPS can launch their full power. Remember, these tips I'm giving apply mostly to difficulty 4 through 5. Most will also work for difficulty 6, like the video footage you've been watching with Knight, but that's a whale territory to be honest, and those guys will probably come up with faster ways to do it. But yeah, with a core of Benny, Xiangling, and Chevy, you could use other Electro DPS units like Yaimiko, Clarand, Raiden Shogun, or even use a full 4-star team by going with Auroran with Cinder City, or good old Fischl. Also, you could go with Chevres Overload by using Pyro DPS like Arlecchino, Moiko along with Benny, Fischl, Auroran, Iansun, and or Yaimiko. Just keep in mind about those constant Pyro attacks you need to keep spamming on this boss, and that you still want to use Pyro DPS against Hydro Tulpa. By the way, as I'm editing this, I saw this great Japanese content creator who managed to clear Dire 6 difficulty with this team of only C0 R1 5 stars and C6 4-star units. You will notice Benny is actually used against Hydro Tulpa, so if you really need him there instead of using him against Lava Dragon statue, these teams seem to work nicely. And what's even better, these comps can be even less optimized on lower difficulties since the bosses have lower HP. So yeah, if needed, you can definitely use Benny or probably even Xiangling against Tulpa, but you still absolutely need to bring enough pyro attacks against Lava Dragon. Now, moving on to the last boss, the Secret Source Automaton, Overseer Device. And this guy actually has a similar mechanic when compared to Lava Statue, except here you definitely want to use crowd DPS units, and lots of them while we're at it, because when the battle starts, he will enter this enhanced state and do this sweeping laser attack, while all of its resistances will be massively boosted. And the only way to deal with this is by unleashing a ton of cryo attacks to keep his circle bar from building up, because unlike the world boss version, this one will lose less resistance after each cryo hit. And yeah, you've guessed it. This is where Hoyo capitalizes on the flavor of the month part, because Skirk absolutely crushes this boss. Well, I mean in difficulty 6 at least. She will absolutely need her most premium team, which is going to be Farina, Escoffier, and Shenhe or Yelan. And if you watch Skirk guide videos, Shenhe usually isn't ranked as the absolutely best unit for Skirk, but in this specific boss fight, her cryo application will be quite crucial. Still, you could use someone like Kaya or Rosaria as an example as well. But whatever you do not use Citlali, because this boss specifically counters units who utilize Night Soul mechanics, and it will become insanely difficult to deal with. Also, keep in mind Farina will not be contributing too much DPS against this boss, since it naturally has a high resistance to damage other than cryo, so I do recommend giving her Favonius Sword to help with faster energy generation, and slap on her something like Tenacity Artifact set if possible to boost the team's attack instead. Now, besides Skirk, you could also go with Wriothesley, Ayaka, or even Ganyu, but probably will only work on lower difficulties. The thing about Skirk is that she has a big advantage compared to others because she can unleash her burst even on first rotation super fast, so by default, I expect her to have fastest clears in the world when compared to any other C6 5-star cryo DPS, if she's also C6, or probably even lower since her constellations scale quite well. Still, remember, at least on difficulty 5, your goal is to make sure to defeat this boss by the 2-minute mark, so even if some options are faster or better, don't feel discouraged to at least try it out. But yeah, I'm sure you've noticed, not a lot of team comp variations when going up against these bosses. Although frankly, difficulty 3 can be cleared with your eyes closed probably, as long as your account is decent enough. 4th, difficulty is where things get interesting, and then difficulty 5 definitely feels harder than Abyss. And I don't even want to talk about difficulty 6. It's literally for whales, to be honest. Or for someone who's straight up invested heavily into Moika, Arlecchino, Knight, Varessa, and Skirk. I've already seen tons of videos of mega whales with full C6 R5 units using completely different teams that I've suggested here because, well, they're playing an entirely different game here. To them, there's tons of different ways to beat the bosses. But anyway, let's say you're struggling to clear some of these bosses. Now what? Well, let's talk about the next best solution, going co-op. So, the most important thing to understand about co-op is that matchmaking is only possible on difficulties 1, 2, and 3, but by inviting people to your world, you can queue up for the rest of the difficulties 4, 5, and 6. However, sadly, only difficulty 4 reward is granted in co-op. You cannot gain those one-time rewards shown here from difficulties 5 and 6. Believe me, I feel this is quite unfair because difficulty 5 rewards 1 additional dust of Enlightment, and it's only possible to get it in single player. Still, at least you can find some people to team up for menacing difficulty 4, and most team comps I've suggested can work here too. But keep in mind, some units will perform quite well here, like Ganyu against Automaton boss, since you can spam her charge attack, skill, and burst, while against Lava Statue, Benny alone can just keep spamming his skill inside the burst to keep building up the boss's circle bar. At the end of the day, if you matchmake, it's more than likely you'll end up in a chaotic battle with random people picking up random units, good or bad against the boss. And if you want to have more control over this, you could go on to many of the community Discord servers and find people to clear this. In fact, maybe someone with a heavily invested account can just carry you if needed. But regardless, if your account is lacking proper DPS units, if you queue up with people, use supports instead and let them know. So running some units like Janssen or Benning could be great for others, who can then unleash better damage. It's kind of like a rule in most other MMOs or co-op games. If you need help clearing stuff, have at least few supports built up to help out others, if you cannot contribute a lot of damage yourself. All in all, if you don't care about the rewards, but want to have some fun in our first proper endgame co-op mode, then yeah, go for even difficulty 5 or 6 to try it out. But I am definitely going to submit in next Genshin's questionnaire my feedback regarding the limitation of co-op rewards. Okay, so let's now talk about the rewards and how to best utilize this new endgame mode. Basically, after defeating any boss on stage 3 or above difficulty, you can use your resin to claim any artifact set pairing you've selected, and then use either 20, 40, or 60 resin. After spending 120 resin, you get an extra artifact drop for the currently selected set. And honestly, this is a pretty amazing drop rate boost, and you'll end up getting about 15% more artifacts from this mode than from a regular domain. So I do recommend dumping your resin here daily. And those of you who saved up fragile resin, yeah, it's now the best time to spend them here, unless you want to save up them for a future artifact set. However, keep in mind, this boosted artifact drop rate called Disturbance Outbreak will be available only for 10 days, and after that, from what I understand, the drop rate will be gone, so make sure to farm artifacts in this endgame mode during those days. Now, as you've noticed, hard difficulty or stage 3 is enough to start getting artifacts. Stage 4, 5, or 6 do not increase the artifact drop rate odds further. So with that being said, just farm the artifacts on stage 3 with your best team against the boss that you can clear the fastest. That's basically the strategy here. Finally, you'll notice after spending 1200 resin, you'll also obtain another free dust of Enlightment. So in total, you can get up to 3 dusts from Stygian Onslaught and 2 more from paid battle pass per single patch cycle. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have questions how to best utilize this powerful item, so let's talk about it now. In a nutshell, Dust of Enlightment is used to reroll level 20 artifact substats. By default, you need to select 2 substats, and then after rerolling begins, you're guaranteed at least 2 times those 2 selected substats will be upgraded. Just keep in mind, both upgrades could just end up rolling into one of 2 stats you've selected, meaning it got both of the promised rolls. However, here's the catch. The more dust you spend, the better the odds become. And how it works is that once you spend 6th dust, now the next artifact will receive 3 guaranteed rolls for the 2 selected substats. After 12 dust, it's still 3 rolls guaranteed, but when 18th dust is spent, now the next artifact is guaranteed to receive 4 rolls on the 2 selected substats. And as you'll notice, Flower and Feather require 1 dust to reroll, while Sands, Goblet, and Circlet need 2 dust. But you can see after I rerolled once, both 2 dust counted here towards the progress. So in other words, I'd receive 4 guaranteed stat upgrades after I've done 9 rerolls strictly on Sands, Goblet, and Circlet. Or if it was strictly Flowers or Feathers, then it would be 18 rerolls, since they each costed only 1 dust. Still, keep in mind you can mix them together. It doesn't matter since the progress is tracked across all artifacts. Now, the dust income, as I said, is pretty scarce. Each patch cycle you can get at 5 dust so far, which means it would take about 6 patch cycles, or 9 months roughly, before you could get those 4 guaranteed stat rolls onto a single artifact. However, it is possible Hoyo may decide to give out this dust via other means like limited rewards, or by exploring new zones when they release, similar to how we can obtain sanctifying elixir from each Natlan tribe's treasure room. But hey, now you're wondering, which artifact is worth spending dust on? Well, the best way to do it would be by first only rolling onto a natural 4 stat line artifact, since that means there's 5 total upgrades you can perform on it. With a natural 3 stat line artifact, you will notice total count is showing only 4 upgrades, which means only 4 will be randomized. So make sure to check if the total rolls your level 22 artifact has is 5. Still, whether you should use dust on flower, feather, sands, goblet, or circlet entirely depends on your account, but I'd still strongly recommend only focusing on artifacts that have 3 good stats for the character who will be using it. For example, this Electro Goblet for Varessa is a pretty good contender for dust because, first of course, it has 5 possible stat upgrades, so it's a natural 4 stat liner artifact. Then we see I sadly rolled 3 times on flat attack, which is bad. However, critical rate, critical damage, and energy recharge are all great substats for her. So yeah, this would be the perfect test subject. Another example could be this flower from Hunter's set with a natural 4 stat line. It's already pretty decent for any pyro DPS when playing with Farina, but it's got those 2 ugly rolls on flat defense, so rerolling it is still worth here. And you could potentially get more rolls onto critical rate, damage, and elemental mastery. And remember, you'll get some guaranteed rolls by the minimum for critical rate and damage if you select them here. And most importantly, you get the decision to keep or discard the new result, so at least there's some control over this new feature. But remember, at the end of the day, there's still that luck element you gotta suffer through, and even after following all the best practices here, it's possible to end up with a sad result like this. Anyway, that's pretty much it when it comes to Stygian Onslaught. If I missed out on some crucial unit or strategy tips against the bosses, let me know in the comments and I'll update my pinned comment. But for now, yeah, it's a nice mode to farm artifacts, but I definitely think there's some problems with the reward distribution, and I'll probably post my full thoughts on this soon. But yeah, thanks for watching and see you next time.